This course satisfies the critical thinking requirement for general education, and we're going to find out why this is a good need. And it partly has to do with the fact that the education system, as George Carlin here says, does suck in certain regards, and we're going to see why, and why critical thinking is so very important. So this is our look at critical thinking. So before we dive into the checklist, we're going to spend a little bit of time taking a look at why critical thinking is so important, why we need to develop this skill, and why for some of you it might be more of a challenge because unfortunately in our school system, oftentimes critical thinking is not practiced enough, especially in the elementary and high school system. So this might be very new to many of you, so let's just dive into it. The need for critical thinking and the ability to judge information, the ability to make deductions, the ability to come to your own conclusions and then compare them to the conclusions that others have done. It's becoming more and more important because of the age that we live in. So one of the big reasons why we need critical thinking like now these days is because of the rise of fake news, it's because of the rise of pseudoscience, it's because of the rise of all this information that is being made available now. And the old model of simply being able to say, well, it appeared in the New York Times, so it's got to be true, that model is gone. That model no longer works. We now need to be able to say, well, let me actively, critically think about what I'm reading and think about, does this make sense? Does it fit with what I already know? If not, where are the disagreements? What does this deductively lead me to conclude about other things? You need to be able to do that kind of analysis these days, because that sort of authority, ability to rely on authority, is becoming ever less reliable. So you might think to yourself, well, I've been critical thinking for a while, but you might not be. Critical thinking is something that is not necessarily promoted in our society. So George Carlin had this great bit where he observed about why the education system sucks, right? And I understand that it's a little bit weird for me to be telling you about this, considering I'm part of that system. But part of it definitely does suck. And he goes, there's a reason for this. There's a reason education sucks. He goes, because the owners of this country don't want that. I'm talking about the real owners now, the big owners, the wealthy, the real owners. So this was back in, I think like the 90s he made this observation. And the gap between the wealthy and the not wealthy has only gotten bigger since that time. So he's talking about the real owners now, the big owners, the wealthy, the real owners, the big wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important decisions. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want, and we're going to see what they don't want.
Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest.
Okay, so anyways, he makes the argument that the big interests, the big corporations, they don't want critical thinking population because they don't want a population that's going to ask questions. It's going to take a look at their situation and say, does this situation really make sense? Should we really be in this particular situation, or is there a better way? Now, I'm going to play you an excerpt from, just in case you think it's just George Carlin that's thinking about this. I'm going to play you an excerpt from Leap First. This is by Seth Godin. So I'm just going to have to pull this up real quick. But he also talks about the school system and how the school system was developed, and more importantly, why the school system was developed. Okay, so he's first going to tell a story about a day that he visited his son's elementary school. All right, so I'll set it up that way. So let's listen to what he has to say about this visit to the elementary school.
The time
when my kids were growing up. And I remember being invited to the 5th grade classroom with an invitation to bring 23 hammers with me. And the teacher was teaching something that was vaguely related to math. And the idea was that if you took a board and put little brads in it, little tiny nails, in a circle or a shape, and then took string, went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, you could make beautiful pictures. But you'd also learn this idea of modulo 9 and remainders, etc. So she said, you bring the hammers, we'll run this class. So I come in, and I don't know if you've ever heard 23 hammers held by 23 10-year-olds hammering as hard as they can over and over again. It is not something that I want to repeat soon. What was fascinating about what happened was this. The teacher said to the students at the beginning, listen carefully, what I want you to do is hammer in each brad halfway so it's nice and tight. And you can go ahead and make a pattern. So there's hammering, 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 hammering. And after about 8 minutes, the teacher walks over to one of the kids and takes his board, makes the class stop. She holds it up and she says, look at this. And she wiggles and pulls the nail out. And she said, I told you to put them all the way in. And one by one, she took every single one of these kids' nails out of the board and dropped them on the floor, teaching him a lesson he will never forget. And the lesson was, this is a class about doing what the teacher told you. Now, there is no shortage of people who know how to hammer in brads. Teaching kids how to do that is not really a productive use of an hour of their time. But the old model was that competence is important. If you're going to be competent, you must learn to follow instructions. And so the lesson she needed to teach, she thought, was you ought to do exactly what I say. This is defective. I'm going to process you again. That's industrialism. So let's talk about competence. In the industry you want to go in.
So, talks about competence, talks about the fact that the old model, and he mentions this a lot, the old model, it's outdated now. The old model was about teaching competence. The old model was about teaching follow the instructions, do it right, and then let's do it again. So you might ask yourself, well, why? Why is this the way that schools are? And it goes back to George Carlin's observation about who is in charge and who is who kind of designed these schools. So he goes on, Seth Godin goes on to talk about how schools were developed, how public schools were developed, and we're going to pick it up here with that particular discussion.
To create, and what it meant was no map. There was no step-by-step instructions. So where did our need for a map come from? Well, I think it came from Massachusetts in the 1800s. Horace Mann, the father of public school, invented something called the Common School. And the purpose of the Common School was that the common people could go and learn to become educated, right? Go and become educated. Why? Because we needed to train kids to work in a factory. We needed to train kids to do what they were told. We needed to train kids to sit still for hours every day and hear the instructions and then say it back to us. Culturally, economically, we needed factory workers. That's why it was supported by all the people who paid for it. Amazingly, I'm not making this up.
All right. So culturally, at that time, when public school was developed, what we needed factory workers. And the public school system was developed in a way to make sure that we had graduates of that system who could be factory workers. So who could do something that had a right answer and do it over and over again, follow the instructions, and do it correctly. What they were not taught was critical thinking. And I can see remnants of that. I mean, there's still remnants of that in the school system. Oftentimes, a lot of remnants of that on the school system. And you know that you've been a victim of this sort of indoctrination if certain things occur. So if you have ever been in a class and you've asked a teacher, is this going to be on the exam? What you are basically saying is, am I supposed to learn this and give it back to you? Because that's what I've been taught is what is the way to success. So if you say, is this going to be on the exam? Basically what you're saying is, I want to learn how to do factory work, please tell me, is this the correct way to do that? If, for example, you're ever in a situation that's open-ended, where there isn't necessarily a correct answer, and you find yourself very, very uncomfortable, it's because you've been, again, indoctrinated in this previous model, in this previous way of thinking. So when we were doing the induction experiment in this class, when we were doing that induction in-class demonstration, some of you were completely fine. Is it this one? No? All right, let me try this one. Is it this one? No? All right, let me try another one. Others of you seem to feel very uncomfortable. You were very much like, I don't like this. It's like, I don't know what to do. Like, which way? What's the next step? What's the next step? Basically, what is the right answer? And again, that's the road to the factory worker, not the road to the scientist. So if you ever have some time, I highly recommend check out Leap First. It's available at the libraries. You can download it as an audiobook. And it basically gets to the heart of what we're trying to do here as scientists, which is create and uncover the knowledge of psychology. So in a lot of what we do, there is no right answer. In a lot of what we do, there is no roadmap to say, go and do this. So we need to get comfortable with abandoning a lot of the things that we've learned, and we need to get comfortable with new skills, such as critical thinking. So I know that this kind of runs counter to one of the big things that we're going to learn in this course, which is APA style. And APA style is literally saying, this is how you need to do it. I want you to do it this way. But everything else that we're going to be doing here is going to be way more open-ended. And as part of that, and as part of your growing knowledge base and skill base, we need to develop this ability to engage in critical thinking. And again, it's something that you might not have been taught a lot of, because again, it's not something that a factory worker needs to know. It's something that a scientist needs to know. It's not something that a lot of the public school system was made to produce. It's something that you might be being exposed to for the first time ever. So let's continue on with a look at why this is so important these days as well. So one of the resources that I love, I use it all the time. I always say it's a great place to start, but it's a horrible place to end, is Wikipedia. I don't know how many times when I was being introduced to a new idea, my first stop is Google, my second stop is Wikipedia, and I'll end up at an article, and that's where I start my look into this information. Well, Wikipedia, you cannot just take information at face value on Wikipedia, because Wikipedia is notorious for being unreliable. You have to apply critical thinking. So sometimes, I don't know, this might be very boring, that might deserve a little critical thinking there, but you can't just take it at face value. So Brian B. Newcomb, this little piece of trivia here I like, he goes, he was noted for refusing to use a comb unless it was purchased that day due to his name. So you can't just take that as face value the way that you might have been able to previously when there was a lot more kind of vettedness and just the world was different. So I don't think Jeremy Renner is a velociraptor. I think he is a musician though. I'm not so sure if Emma Stone did fall out of the sky as an angel. That one might be true as well. But again, these are all examples from Wikipedia that made it out into the world. So Spot the Dog is probably not a book series written by Ernest Hemingway under the pseudonym Eric Hill. And it probably doesn't center around the character Spot, a young golden retriever who struggles with alcoholism and a shattered sense of masculinity. Spot the Dog showcases Hemingway's hallmark minimalism. Where is Spot? Is he under the stairs? Is he in the box? No, he's at a bar, sipping whiskey, sucking on cigarettes, suffering. That's the kind of thing where when you read it, you just can't accept it. You have to say to yourself, this seems odd. This does not fit with what I currently know about children's books. This does not fit with what I currently know about, my society. Maybe my next step would be to take a look at Spot the Dog and see if this is true or not. So these are all skills that we have to develop because, these examples here are pretty obvious, pretty, chosen to be obvious. Other ones, not so much. So I found this article in Wikipedia. It was about the Reich Corps of the Trombone. And this was about an organization of trombonists that was sponsored by the Nazi Party during its rise to power through the end of World War II. And it's all about their history and how they were just such powerful performers that they were used at all these rallies and all these events, and they were instrumental in kind of, you know, the wave of Nazism that swept through Germany at that time and changed. And look at it; it looks 100% legit. I mean, it has origin, history, selected bibliography. It's false. It's a hoax. It's made up. It's completely made up. So we cannot rely on like the look of things. We cannot rely on where information comes from anymore. We have to start really asking ourselves the types of questions that you're going to see on the checklist about what is going on here. What do I think? Does it fit? What does it mean? Does it all make sense before we take it all in? And just to give you some more examples, even when it's the truth, it turns out it's not always the real truth. So this was a very interesting interaction between a Swedish professor, TED speaker, Hans Rosling, and he was challenging the news media. He was being interviewed, and he was talking to an interviewer, and he was telling them that you cannot trust news outlets if you really want to understand the world. So we're going to take a look at what he means by that and just kind of see why, again, we need to develop these critical thinking tools.
Men man kan ju inte använda sig av media om man ska förstå världen. Man måste ju ha en grundläggande skolutbildning. Och sen måste man följa upp de här grundläggande fakta. Om man tror att större delen av världens befolkning är jättefattiga, flickorna går inte i skolan, barnen vaccineras inte och här är de rika länderna och så försöker de komma dit som flyktingar. Då vet man ju inte hur det är. Man måste förstå att det finns länder på alla nivåer och de flesta är någonstans i mitten. De går i skolan, de är vaccinerade och de har tvåbarnsfamiljer. Du pratar om befolkningstillväxt. Antal barn på jorden har slutat öka. Antalet barn på jorden har slutat öka därför att de allra flesta använder preventivmedel. Och det visste inte Danmarks journalister när jag frågar dem idag.
Men det jeg tænker på, set fra et medieperspektiv, ikke bare her i programmet, men medier generelt, det er jo, at mange medier vil sige, vi rapporterer om verdens tilstand, som den er, og lige nu er der krig, konflikter, kaos, uro og en hel række andra negativa aspekter.
Det var ju fel. Du har ju fel, rakt upp och ner fel. Det var ett fantastiskt val i Nigeria. Demokratiskt val i Afrikas största nation. Där en halvduglig regering ersattes av en mycket kompetent chef nu, Mohammed den nya, som får stöd från hela befolkningen. Det fantastiska valet som var i Indonesien förra året. De framsteg som är i Indien. Igår så förklarade vi att Indien nu är fritt från städkraft.
Men Nigeria är fanget i en dyb terrorkrig mot Boko Haram.
Ja, en liten del av Nigeria, inte resten. Nigeria har en snabb ekonomisk tillväxt och fallande barnadödlighet. Om ni väljer att visa om ni väljer att för mig att bara visa min sko, den är ju jätteful, det är ju bara en del av mig. Om du väljer att visa mitt ansikte så är det en annan. Ni visar ju en liten del och kallar det för världen. Den stora skillnaden, att flickorna går i skolan, att barnen vaccineras, att de flesta har elektricitet hemma, att människor är kapabla och är yrkesfolk runt omkring i världen. Det är viktigt att visa, men det händer så sakta så det kommer inte med nyhet.
Vad baserar du den viden på?
Jag använder vanlig statistik som är sammanställd av Världsbanken och FN och det är inte kontroversiellt. Det här är ingenting som man kan diskutera. Jag har rätt och du har fel.
Yeah.
There you go. So it's very true. They've actually done studies on what makes people read an article online. What makes people click on an article online? And does anybody know the one emotion that is the most likely to get somebody to click a headline to read the entire article? Any ideas? No.
Like shock or something that you don't agree with.
It's close to shock. It's outrage. People click on outrage. They don't click on, the good stories about the good elections or, India being free of tetanus. They click on outrage. And take a look at the news media. Take a look at any of your, kind of news feeds, and just take a look at how many of them are geared towards causing outrage. And if you're going to cause outrage because that's what gets clicks, you're not going to report on the true picture of the world. You're going to report on a lot of the ugliness. So always, think about that. Think about, is this the actual truth of what's going on out there, or is it just being reported because it fits the current narrative? And that's why studies are very, very important to understand the real truth. So if you recall, a couple of classes ago, we talked about the Black Lives Matter movement and how every single news report was always about a African American, usually male, being killed by a white police officer. And that made people think it's got to be a racism issue. It's got to be racist police officers that are causing this. And somebody did a study and said, no, that's not the case at all. It's the meso and macro societal policies that are causing this disproportionate number of minorities being murdered. And again, we need to stop that. It's an issue. It needs to be addressed. But if we're wasting our time looking at the wrong area because we didn't critically think about the information, that's going to be an issue. So I don't know if we'll get to the full checklist, but I really want to drive this point home, especially how important it is. This is from a few years ago. I like this one because it kind of hits home. I'm from Canada. I'm actually from Ontario, the province of Ontario. And this one made the rounds, and it went viral on Facebook and other social media sites. And it was all about Mid-Lake Ontario eliminates soccer ball from youth soccer programs. So it goes, troubled by what they see as the overemphasis on winning in sports involving kids even under the age of 10. Youth soccer groups in Canada are doing something about it. In at least one community, Mid-Lake Ontario, kids play in leagues where they no longer keep score or even play the game with the ball. This year, to address some of the negative effects of competition, we've actually removed the ball, says Helen Dabney Coyle of Mid-Lake Soccer Association, and the kids are loving it. So it's this entire article about how they're, now they get to try new things in game settings without fear of failure. And this ball-less soccer is a challenge from a coaching perspective. I have to do a lot of imagining. And then in the background, you can hear the coach, Schultz, is heard asking his team, okay, now who wants to pretend to have the ball? When I say that Michael has kicked the ball downfield, we all have to imagine that it's down there. So this went viral, and people, again, were outraged. People were like, this is horrible for these children. They're not learning any of these skills. This is what's wrong with our society. And, today it's all these entitled children. Nobody can lose. Everybody has to win. Everybody is, has to do amazing. And it cites a CBC radio documentary. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Canada, the CBC is basically our only national channel, right? So here in the States, there's ABC, CBS, NBC. We got CBC, and it was usually the be-all and end-all of where you got your news, right? It was the highest quality news reporting. So apparently this is from a CBC radio documentary. All you had to do was click on this link to see that it took you to a satire radio show. This is basically like SNL, right, where they're just satirizing the news. It's if you want to see other examples, if you're on Reddit, you can go to the subreddit AP Onion, where people believe stories from the fake news place, The Onion, or the satirical news place, The Onion. So they printed this, and then they retracted it later. They go, no, the show is satire, we got punked. But in terms of what we've seen with false memories, once you get the idea out there, number one, you might have never read that. Number two, you might forget that. You might forget, and they found this as well, when people share stories that they know are fake, when people share stories and they say, oh my gosh, take a look at this news story, hashtag super fake, hashtag can you believe they print this? Even if people realize that the story is fake, they're likely later on to forget the source of where they heard the information, and they'll remember the information. So that's just true, and then then they'll believe the story. So think about everything that you know. Think about all the facts that you know, right? Who was the first president of the United States? What's the capital of California, right? What are the days of the week? Think about all those facts that you know. Can you remember when you learned them? Who told you? Where did you find out? Probably not, right? But you remember the facts. That is occurring now on a more widespread scale because of how easily information flows. So just to show you the spread of this actually got picked up not just by Opposing Views, this is a Canadian site, but it also got picked up by the Washington Times. So the Washington Times reprinted this story and then later edited note, sorry, this is a satirical news story, but again, the damage had already been done. And this will go even further when we look at scientific reporting. And one of the themes that we're going to explore in more depth when we get to the library assignment is that for anything that you're working on, for anything that's important to you, for anything that you want to make sure that you get the true information, you always, always, always have to go to the source. So the spot the dog example, that would have been easily answered by just opening up the book, Spot the Dog. This news report here could have been easily double-checked just by clicking on the link and going to the webpage and seeing, oh my gosh, this is a satirical comedy channel. So we need to do that because media outlets, secondhand reporting of scientific facts usually tend to distort and oftentimes present information that's just not true. It's just not the case. So for example, this was one that came out a few years ago, and it goes, better identification of Viking corpses reveals half of the warriors were female. So this was one that made the rounds because people, it was shocking, it was surprising. You have this idea of Viking warriors being all males, women are not involved. Turns out that half of them were women. So it got picked up on a number of different media news outlets. So this is Tor.com, this is Nature World News. More than Thor, half of Viking warriors were female. This actually is probably even more in the moment right now that Jane Foster is going to be the new Thor in the MCU. It goes, a new study published in the Journal of Early Medieval Europe details how burial sites in late Viking kingdoms of Denmark and Eastern England included shield maidens buried with weapons and armor. So they did this with an analysis of the graves and what they were buried with, and then they did DNA analysis, and lo and behold, half of the warriors were women. And it was picked up in the Globe and Mail as well. Half of the Viking invaders may have been women, says study. And if you go to the original study, that is not at all what it says. It does not say anything about these females being warriors. And it actually took the Mary Sue, which is a feminist sci-fi comics geekdom website, to actually set the record straight, because they cared enough about it, and they said, let's take a look at the original article, and it says that study doesn't say that half of Viking warriors were women, and it actually is only dealing with settlers and not specifically warriors. So it had nothing to do with warriors. It was just talking about the settlers that came. But the news media reported it incorrectly. And again, if you read something like that, if you read anything about science, you need to go to the original research and then see what it actually says. Because there are numerous examples of where what's reported is completely incorrect. Now, on the other hand, years later, a new study came out that actually did provide more evidence that there were actually female Viking warriors, and this is the study. Oh no, this ain't the study right here. But it actually came out that it was a new study that actually did say that there were warriors that were found with female DNA. So again, the news media reported it incorrectly. They reported it wrong. And they do this all the time. I remember not too long ago, I just kept hearing news reports about how one glass of red wine was like working out for an hour. Like if you drink one glass of red wine, you get the same benefit as working out for an hour. And hearing that, how could you not just get completely jacked drinking 4 glasses of red wine a day and just end up super buff and super fit? Go to the original study, and there is like one hormone that increases out of the thousands of changes your body goes through. There is one hormone that increases during an hour of working out, and that same increase can be produced with 1 glass of red wine. So you really get like 1/1000th of the benefit of a workout from 1 glass of red wine. But news reports were just like, oh my gosh, it's like 1 glass of red wine is like a workout. It's not the case. So I'll give you, we'll take a look at one more example. So all of these examples were getting more and more sort of credible to illustrate the need for critical thinking. This last one is the most, comes from the most credible source. So again, these are all news reports about scientific articles. You can't trust the news reports, go to the scientific articles. Turns out you also cannot trust the scientific articles. So you also have to critically think about scientific articles. And here's an example from Nicholas Guedjuin. And he did a study, he did numerous studies on sociology, social psychology, and he did a study where women's hairstyles and men's behavior, a field experiment. So he had women in 3 different hairstyles, one with hair falling naturally on her shoulders, one on her back, and one in a ponytail, and the other one with their hair twisted in a bun. And he measured passerbys' helping behavior. So he found that the hairstyles of women had no effect on whether women would help them, but found that the hairstyle influenced male passerbys, where they were more readily helping the women with the loose hair and not the women with the ponytail or with the bun. So he published this. This is in the Scandinavian Journal of Psychology, and it was peer-reviewed. And most people missed this because they weren't critically thinking. But 2 readers took a look at his data, specifically that data right there, and we'll zoom in on it. And they said to themselves, well, let's think critically about this data. Look at that average helping, average helping, average helping, average helping, average helping, average helping. They noticed, Nick Brown and James Heathers noticed that every single one of these averages ends in 0. Every one. The chances that you would actually collect data the way that they did out of 90 pedestrians and tally up how many of them helped and then end up with an average of 0 for all 6 measures, there is only one chance in 714 that that would happen. They critically thought about this paper. They took a look at and asked questions about the data. They engaged with it, and they came to the conclusion that Nicholas Guedjuin, and I'm going to have to say allegedly because this is being videoed, made up this data. And it turns out that in his research, it seems to be a pattern of him just allegedly making up data, right? So again, I would love to say, just find a respectable journal, like the Scandinavian Journal of Psychology, and you can trust what's in there. You can't. You have to engage, and you have to critically think about what you're looking at. So that's where we're going to end today.